Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Book Trek 2023, the summer of Trek. We are closing in on the end of the first month of Book Trek 2023. This is a BookTube event created by Vin at Revenant Reads, and he's assembled a valiant bridge crew of BookTubers to read Star Trek stuff all summer long. And I've been overindulging, as I tend to do. I've been overindulging in Star Trek stuff by reading pretty much a book a night. I've been involved in two real BookTube events this month. June on the Range, which is only the month of June, and Book Trek 2023, the first month of which is June. And for both of those, I've just been adding a Western and a Star Trek book to my night's reading. I kind of thinking that maybe I should ease off on that pressure for the months of July and August, give my co-hosts a chance to catch up. But for now, at least for the rest of June, for today and tomorrow, I will do another Star Trek book. And I picked one last night that underscores some of the problems and issues that we've been talking about with Star Trek fiction in its glory days. Star Trek fiction is no longer in its glory days at all. When just a couple of years ago, there were 5 Star Trek shows on TV. A couple of those have been abruptly and mysteriously canceled, but you could say, sorta, kinda, if you were the blue hair, Ukrainian flag, pronouns in your bio crowd, you could say that we were living in the golden age of Star Trek now. When all it was really for a lot of those shows was the golden age of institutional capture. And some of those shows do still exist and are at least on the surface, changing their tone. Some of the activism tone is gone. The activism tone of Star Trek Discovery isn't much in evidence in Strange New Worlds, in Star Trek Strange New Worlds. It occurs about once every episode that will show up. Something like that will show up. But it's not the whole episode. It's not the cast doing interviews with Entertainment Weekly disparaging the viewers. It's not anything like that. And of course, Star Trek Picard, the season 3 of Star Trek Picard is the exact opposite of any of that. So again, with one notable exception. The notable exception seems to boil down to unarmed combat in hallways. where in Star Trek Picard season 3, a character named Raffi, who as far as we know has no physical combat training at all, is suddenly a master ninja, a super, armed combat warrior sensei who can defeat 1,000 people in a row, never get tired, never sustain a scratch. And the same thing is true in Star Trek Picard, in Star Trek Strange New Worlds season 2. We just had an episode, also combat in hallways, where the 2 people on board Captain Pike's Enterprise who shouldn't have a scene like this the most, medical personnel, Dr. M'Benga and Nurse Christine Chapel, are in close quarters, unarmed combat with armored, trained Klingon warriors. And I forget how many they each take out. I think it might be 100 that they each take out. And they're a little bit out of breath when it's done. But the fact that Dr. M'Benga would be easily gutted by one Klingon warrior, the fact that Christine Chapel would have no chance whatsoever against a Klingon serving woman, much less a Klingon soldier who's been put through serious drill combat. In so-called New Trek, you will get moments like that, but they aren't carved out of that anymore. They're not entirely that anymore. Star Trek Discovery has been catapulted 500 years into the future so that they can lecture a whole new generation of people to be better. But the actual Star Trek that's on the air doesn't seem to want to do much of that. But even though there was a time when there was Star Trek Strange New Worlds, there was Star Trek Picard, there was Star Trek Lower Decks, there was Star Trek Prodigy, and there was Star Trek Discovery, even though there was a time when all that was on TV, there were no novels. Virtually none. A tiny trickle, 2 a year, something like that. But once upon a time, that wasn't true. Once upon a time, there were 3 Star Treks. For a brief time, there were, I think, 3 Star Trek shows that were pulling in really good ratings. Keep in mind, Kurtzman Trek, New Trek, doesn't pull in really good ratings, doesn't pull in ratings at all. It's not allowed into the fair competition of the Nielsen ratings because the producers of Star Trek Discovery learned the one time they tried it that no one likes the show, and that if they put it in natural, in the wild ratings, they'll have the embarrassment of it coming in 470th behind 3 a.m. reruns of The Price is Right, and no one wants that. The Paramount doesn't want that, so they didn't allow it. It's siloed off. But But once upon a time, that wasn't true. Star Trek shows were competing in the Nielsen's and doing quite well. Star Trek Enterprise, as it was coming to a close, with a whole bunch of Star Trek fans realizing that this was their epical Star Trek, that this had been their ethical and personal growth, this show, but also Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Voyager that were on the air and were doing well, and fans largely loved them. I think some of the fan criticisms of Star Trek Voyager are a little bit wide of the mark, but all I can say to those critics is, if you spend enough time with Neelix, you start to like him. It's nice to be nice. All right, Neelix may be a bridge too far, but the point is that when those shows were on and they were doing well, the arm of publicity at the studio that knew there were books out there, these black-suited creatures with black reflexive sunglasses that reproduced by parthenogenesis, and no one knows where they come from. They only exist to make money. They realized that these books are tied into money-making products. So there were a lot of books, a lot of them. And in the books, often attempts were made to do what would have been far too expensive to do on the small screen, which is to link the current Star Trek franchises, to link them all. That would have been almost impossible to do. The cost, when it was done, was usually astronomical. And so it was very seldom done on the shows. You might, for Star Trek Enterprise, you might be able to induce DeForest Kelley to come on for your debut episode as Bones McCoy. DeForest Kelley wouldn't ask all that much money, but the studio would want. It would be a complicated thing to do. You would certainly never have an episode of Next Generation where the Enterprise D shared the screen with the original Enterprise. No bloody A, B, C, or D. That would be way too expensive. And Shatner, out of the question. Simply out of the question. When Next Generation was doing really well in the ratings and raking in a lot of money, it was still costing a lot of money. A huge amount in special effects budget. But they tried the ultimate by having Mr. Spock on the show. But most of the time, no. And even if you did that, you would never do that more than once. Right? So Tom Paris and Ensign Kim might show up at Quark's bar at Deep Space Nine before they get on board the USS Voyager. But that's it. It's not like the shows would ever have actual crossovers. It's not like Benjamin Sisko would find a space orb, a Bajoran space orb, and end up on Voyager for an episode or a series of episodes. And if Benjamin Sisko and Jadzia Dax go back in time to Kirk's Enterprise, it's not going to be a recreation. It's going to be they're going to digitally muck with the footage. The point I'm trying to make is that the books, when there was a new book for each franchise coming out each month, so 4 books a month at least, attempts were made often to link all 4, which is tough to do because the Enterprise is 80 years before the Next Generation or Deep Space Nine or Voyager, and Voyager is 80,000 light years away. So it's really tough to link them all, and there have been about 7 or 8 attempts. There were about 7 or 8 attempts in the real golden age of Star Trek fiction, and not all of them are as successful as others. I kept hoping when they were happening every time one was introduced, whether it's the Invasion series that we've seen here on Book Trek, or something to do with a virus that crops up in all of the incarnations and all sorts of other time frames in addition to that. Every time something like that happened, I always thought, come on. Star Trek, both the original series and the Next Generation, provide us with an infinite number of MacGuffins. Let's do this wholesale. These are books. These don't have the budget of crossing over series on a live-action show. These are books. So let's do this wholesale. Let's get all 4 of these crews together in a massive event. It wouldn't be hard to think up such a thing. If you gave me a weekend, I could come up with such a thing that wouldn't offend people with its outrageousness. It would be workable. That never happened, and that's a shame. But attempts were still made to link all 4 somehow. And one of those attempts was a thing called the Day of Honor, which turns out to be a Klingon holiday, a sort of a Klingon holiday/holy day, where Klingons remember what it means to be a Klingon. They remember their family, their honor, the gods that they killed, all their beloved ones in Sto-vo-kor. They remember all of that. It's kind of a revel in your Klingon essence type day. Because somebody somewhere thought, well, that will work because there are technically Klingons in all 4 shows. You would think there wouldn't be in Voyager, but Captain Janeway's chief engineer, B'Elanna Torres, is half Klingon. So it kind of sort of works. And so we did that. We got that. We got Day of Honor. So you have a Day of Honor novel for the original series with Kor, Commander Kor of the Klingon Empire. You get Deep Space Nine. You get The Next Generation, of course, has Lieutenant Worf, who's a member of the bridge crew and a full-blooded Klingon. And you also get Voyager. And Voyager is the book that I just happened on at random last night. This is Michael Jan Freeman writing Her Klingon Soul, where the focus is going to be on B'Elanna Torres, because B'Elanna Torres is an interesting case. She is half Klingon, but in a way, she is a mirror image of Worf. Worf is a full-blooded Klingon, but he is raised by kindly humans on Earth, which makes him become more of a Klingon. In much the same way that Spock, who is half Vulcan, extra strong embraces his Vulcan identity, unless you're watching Strange New Worlds, in which case he doesn't. But we'll talk about Strange New Worlds some other time. But in Star Trek, in what I call real Star Trek, because there is no way that Strange New Worlds is real Star Trek. It is Kelvin timeline, it is a new timeline, the Kurtzman timeline, or whatever you want to call it. There's no way that it is canonical Star Trek, that it's Roddenberry Star Trek. But again, we can talk about that some other time. But in real Star Trek, Spock is half human and extra strong embraces his Vulcan side, even going so far eventually as to try to embrace the Kolinar and erase all human emotions from himself. Whereas, so Spock and Worf are a lot alike in that regard. And B'Elanna Torres is the exact opposite. She's embarrassed by her Klingon heritage. She's always thought that her mother made too much of it. She's always thought that it drove her father away. She's always felt insecure about it. She's always wished that people wouldn't bring it up. And so the Klingon Day of Honor is going to be a prickly thing for her, and that's the opening gambit of this book. It opens on Voyager, where B'Elanna Torres is just trying to get through the day without anyone shoving Day of Honor stuff in her face. She's cutting people off in conversations. She's dodging around in hallways so she doesn't have to hear it. She knows it's her first Day of Honor on board Voyager. She knows she's going to hear it. And eventually, Neelix, who's, eventually, I hate to bring his name up again because I know he's a sore spot for the people who don't like Voyager. Eventually, Neelix decides to use up all of his replicator rations for a month to replicate indigenous Klingon dishes, kach, and whatnot. How he would do this, I have no idea. There is no way that he would be able to do this, especially since, as we're told in this book, and we were told multiple times in Deep Space Nine and in The Next Generation, Klingons like a lot of their food still living. There's no way that you could do it. Replicator rations are not. But out of kindness, he makes these dishes for B'Elanna Torres, and she doesn't want any of them. She stalks right out of the lounge. And Chakotay, Janeway's first in command, and B'Elanna's former Marquis colleague, has to catch up with her and ask, what's going on. And that provokes a flood of memories about her and her mother and her father and whatnot. And that's all very interesting. B'Elanna Torres is a very interesting Star Trek character. But then, that can't be the plot of this book. And Michael Jan Freeman, therefore, has to give us another plot. And the plot is designed both to give us a MacGuffin to keep the whole thing going, and also to bring into further focus more of B'Elanna's involuntary confessions about her feelings about her Klingon soul, because she and Harry Kim are abducted by slave trading aliens, and they're thrown together in a lot of company, and he's a little bit intimidated by her because he's a little intimidated by everybody, and it gives her more of an opportunity to connect with her Klingon soul, I guess you could say, or Klingon soul. It's interesting in parts. This author has never done anything for me, so I wasn't expecting more than that. I didn't get any more than that. It's interesting in parts. There were parts of it that I think were very much indebted to... there's a Voyager episode where a race of aliens called the Vidians use genetic regenerative technology, medical and psychobabble magic, to split B'Elanna Torres into a human and a Klingon version of herself. And that episode is fascinating. It is fascinating to see. I wish, it was the path not taken, because I kind of wished right from the beginning of Voyager, right from the first episode, that B'Elanna Torres were a Klingon. I mean, you could say, maybe you might object by saying, well, how many Klingons are there in Starfleet anyway? But B'Elanna Torres left Starfleet, and who knows how many Klingons there are in the Maquis. That would have been neat. It would have been a cosmetic makeup ordeal for the actress every single day for 7 years. But it would have been really interesting, I think. It didn't happen. Instead, she's half Klingon. We have no idea how that would work. No idea what she's like. No details are gone into as to what she's like. With Spock, we know that physiology-wise, his blood may have, as Christine Chappell says, some human elements, but he is entirely Vulcan. He has their greater physical strength. He has their telepathic abilities. He has their self-healing abilities. We don't know about B'Elanna Torres. Klingons are stronger than humans. And they also have, famously, as we learned in The Next Generation, they have all sorts of redundant technology, a redundant biology. Backup sets of lungs, backup sets of hearts and livers and organs of all kinds. We have no idea if that's true for the nervous system, the muscle tension or whatnot. We have no idea any of that with B'Elanna Torres that I know of. I don't recall that ever being addressed directly in Voyager. Maybe it has been in Voyager novels. But this doesn't do anything as interesting as that. This is just her getting in touch with her inner savage in order to work against these slave traders. It's not a convincing plot, and the action back on Voyager while that's going on is not gripping at all. So, I mean, when you look at the gimmick of linking all four of these franchises somehow, if you come up with the idea, well, let's link them all through the Klingons, through a Klingon holiday, through the soul of the Klingon identity, as we've given it in The Next Generation. It's a little bit of anachronistic remapping to do it for the original series, where Klingons aren't all that much noble, where we're given the impression that they are treacherous savages most of the time. But if you had a gimmick like that, linking all four franchises, and it was all about the Klingon soul, then if there were ever any story conferences and people were sort of looking at this from 30,000 feet, they might have said, well, if we do that, the Voyager one is going to be the weak one, because it's a very tenuous connection. B'Elanna Torres is not full Klingon, and she's totally rejected her culture. So there's not going to be much to hang that on unless they find other Klingons. There's a great Voyager episode where they find other Klingons in the Delta Quadrant. But unless that happens, and that doesn't happen here, if you're just hanging it on B'Elanna Torres, then it's going to be kind of weak. And if there ever was such a story conference, it was correct. It was correct. I read the Day of Honor book for the original series, and I thought it was really good. This, though, no. No. It was kind of bland. So I'm going to spin the wheel again tonight to finish out June on Book Trek. I don't know how that's going to work, but I'm thinking that in July, in addition to maybe stoppering down, and maybe not doing a daily video is a little much for any event, maybe instead of doing, in addition to not doing a daily video, I was thinking I might do some reviews. Like maybe a 40-minute review of each new Strange New Worlds episode. I put a big banner on the front of it saying, spoiler filled. Do not watch this if you haven't seen the episode. Do not watch, because I'm going to talk about extremely specific things. I'm thinking I might do that. I'm not getting a whole lot of luck getting my co-host to talk about Strange New Worlds with me, and I still do want to talk about them. It's a real Star Trek show happening right now. I was on the old curly wired telephone. You'll have to Google that. I was on the telephone with half a dozen people talking about each new episode of Star Trek when it was premiering. I was doing the same thing for a little while with Voyager, or with the Next Generation, and then it was mostly just me kvetching. And with Voyager and Deep Space Nine, I was doing that. Also with Enterprise. I kind of want to do that. So maybe I'll branch out to, the visual stuff, to non-book stuff in July, do a little of that. But anyway, I still have time to think about it. We'll do one more book for June, so we'll see what we encounter with tonight's spin of the wheel. I'll be back to let you know. Thank you, BookTube.